Hello and welcome to the National Security Conversations. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said last week that if India's sovereignty is challenged, it will hit back with double the force. Every time there is an attack on India, the Indian politicians are in a habit of saying, "Hum muh tod jawab denge," or "We will give them a strong response." Has India lived up to its promise of striking back, which it issues from time to time? Or is India a soft country with a defensive military posture, unable to carry out its threats decisively and strongly? Or has India's defensive posture served it well? To discuss this and more, I have with me in the studio Professor Rajesh Rajagopalan. Rajesh teaches international politics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. He also teaches national and international security issues. And he is an author of two very important books, Fighting Like a Guerrilla, The Indian Army and Counterinsurgency, and Second Strike, Arguments about Nuclear War in South Asia. And Professor Rajagopalan is known for his rather hardline and hawkish views on national security and national defense related issues. Welcome to the National Security Conversations, Professor Rajagopalan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let me begin by asking this question about India's strategic posture. You seem to argue in your writings that India has a very defensive military posture, and that you have also advocated in many ways that India should change this defensive military posture. Why do you say that?
Given that we have faced significant threats of terrorism from Pakistan, my argument is that if you when you are facing those kinds of threats, you do need to have a harder response in order to deter Pakistan. I mean, not vis-a-vis our other smaller neighbors, but specifically when it comes to terrorism in Pakistan, I think a deterrence posture is necessary, and deterrence is not possible with a purely defensive posture that we have adopted. So we need to have a somewhat more harsher response when it comes to terrorist attacks against us, primarily as a way of deterring further terrorist
Let's come to the India-Pakistan relations on which you've written quite a lot. You wrote in March this year, for instance, that the almost daily cross-border firing on the line of control and frequent terror attacks in Jammu and Kashmir are clear indicators that India's current deterrence strategy against Pakistan has failed. The reasons are not hard to find. New Delhi's fear of escalation is now so well established that Pakistan has little reason to be deterred by any Indian threats. You went on to add, as long as India continues to fear escalation, it has little chance of deterring Pakistan's support for cross-border terrorism. Are you saying that there is no concern for escalation? How does that argument hold in a nuclearized scenario like we have in South Asia?
I've been writing that for several years, so I mean I fully subscribe to that point, which is basically that the point is that escalation is something that is a useful excuse for Pakistan, for other interested parties around the world.
Are you saying it's not a reality?
It's not a reality.
It's not a possibility at all?
I wouldn't say it's not a possibility at all, but it is highly unlikely, and escalation actually helps us, because how does a country that is far weaker than us escalate against us? That makes no sense whatsoever. Right? I mean, the possibility that a weaker power can escalate against a stronger power makes no logical sense. Right? I mean, the only way they can escalate is by obviously nuclear weapons. But there are several steps before you get to the nuclear level. I mean, so it's not as if they're going to escalate to the nuclear level at the first sign of trouble. I mean, right? I mean, they have to first lose a conventional war, and even if they lose a conventional war, they have to the excuse for using nuclear weapons would have to be an injury of a significant injury. I mean, what kind of significant injury can we cause Pakistan that would force them to reach for the nukes? The idea that if we go a couple of kilometers into Pakistani territory, they will start using nukes is an absurd argument. because it is
Yeah, but
not
it's also a
something-
reality that Pakistan army is not a weak army. It's a strong army, and it has trained all its life preparing for a situation of this kind. So if India escalates into the Pakistani occupied Kashmir, then the Pakistanis will try and encroach into the Indian side in a different location. And clearly, for at least for a week or 10 days, Pakistani army will be able to withstand an Indian aggression or counter attack India. What happens thereafter in your sort of estimate?
There is no scenario, and this other people have told them. I mean, this I'm sort of quoting from what the Americans told the Pakistanis in the 1990 crisis, I think, if I recall correctly. They have gamed it multiple times, and you can game it yourself in the sense that what scenario allows a country that is so much weaker than India to win a war against India. There is no way on earth that can happen, because the imbalance of power, some of our capabilities deteriorate. In some cases, we need better training, or we need better equipment. Or all of those things are true. We need to have better stocks. All of those things are true. But even with all of those weakness, we are still a far stronger country, in militarily speaking, than Pakistan.
Conventionally speaking.
Conventionally
Yes.
speaking, yeah.
What if there is, say, for example, there are talks about tactical nuclear weapons being developed by the Pakistani side. They may decide when the push comes to shove to pre-delegate the authorization of those tactical nuclear weapons against invading forces. And if there is a fall-dark gap, like sort of trigger situation where they say that up to this point, and we have deployed tactical nuclear weapons, and they are in the hands of the local commanders. You come beyond that, and you are initiating a nuclear crisis. How would India respond to that kind of a situation?
I mean, so there is the idea that you have a situation where Pakistan delegates its authority. They haven't done that so far, right? I mean, so to some extent that would be going against what they have done so far, which was keep these weapons centralized, even though they are tactical nuclear weapons. To the best of our knowledge, these are not delegated to lower level commands, definitely not to the division command.
But that doesn't take away from the fact that it might in future be pre-delegated.
Well, there is a lot of things that they might do. We can't sort of obviously go on the basis of what they might do. They could also start a full-scale nuclear war. I mean, but the point is,
but you could game all of these things.
Yeah, exactly. So when you game all those things, you don't sort of you have to look at the probability of what would their calculation be, right? I mean, so if you're looking at the calculation that they have, how would it help them to use tactical nuclear weapons if you are a few kilometers inside Pakistani territory, or even better for us if you are inside Pakistan occupied Kashmir. POK, so the idea that they would use nuclear weapons of any kind, tactical or otherwise, in POK, I find fundamentally incredible. I mean, so credible deterrence has to be.
But as a deterrence theorist, you would also consider the fact that the threat of the use of nuclear weapons is itself enough to dissuade a country from initiating a war.
So I think the link between conventional and nuclear is what matters. During the Cold War period, that link was very tight. So any war that began at the conventional level would very easily escalate to the nuclear level, and that was the reason why both sides took enormous effort to ensure that even a conventional war didn't start, because of the tight linkage between conventional and nuclear war. Simply because the forces were structured in such a way that they had to be ready to go in a very short time, in half an hour. They had to be ready to launch nuclear attacks on each other. That is not how small nuclear forces are structured. Small nuclear forces are structured with far greater political control. They have to be only used deliberately. They cannot be used by.
But the fact that the Pakistanis have developed tactical nuclear weapons indicates a certain intent behind this.
Their intent is to deter us. I mean, so that intent is. I mean, what they're doing makes perfect sense as a deterrence strategy, right? It makes no sense when it comes to actual use, because if as a deterrence strategy, if they can scare us, their interest is in scaring us with escalation. So that we don't escalate, right? I mean, that is perfectly understandable, given that they are conventionally the weaker power, and therefore they have to depend on nuclear escalation to threaten us with escalation, because conventional escalation wouldn't threaten us. I mean, if they simply said, oh, if you attack one place, we will attack another place, which was, for example, India's deterrence strategy in the 1950s and what we did in 1965, because our deterrence strategy was basically to say that if you attack in Kashmir, we'll attack in the plains, right? That made sense for a stronger power. It doesn't make sense for a weaker power.
So you're saying that nuclear weapons, Pakistani nuclear weapons, do not alter the situation between.
It doesn't alter the situation, because it makes sense for them to make the threat. But under how do they win a conventional a nuclear escalatory strategy? It makes no sense because because you're losing, let's say, Hajipur Pass, that works as long as deterrence works. I'm talking about going beyond that, right? I mean, so that's why I'm saying that their deterrence strategy is perfect, right? In the sense that their deterrence strategy is based on nuclear escalation. I'm saying it doesn't make any sense for them to actually carry out that threat, right? So
A threat is good enough.
no, the threat. So if you believe that threat, that's good enough, right? I mean, so what I'm saying is that if India were to ignore that threat and escalate, right, then their strategy is basically collapses, right? I mean, so basically their idea that that somehow they will escalate to get out of that situation doesn't make any sense when it comes to actual use. It makes sense to threaten that. It doesn't make any sense to actually use that. That's my point.
Right.
And as long as you recognize that it doesn't make any sense for them to use it, you can actually escalate.
Okay, so let me understand this. You are saying that if there is a Mumbai-like attack once again, India should completely disregard the nuclear bluff that has been posed by the Pakistanis and should go ahead and carry out a conventional strike against Pakistan, be it in Kashmir or in the plains.
I would say Kashmir, but I mean, I'm fine with wherever. But the reason why it's Kashmir is because you don't have to give the territory back. I mean, unlike the plains where it's not your territory, we are not claiming the territory, so we'll have to give it back. So I would prefer.
What retaliation do you expect from this kind of a strike by the Indian side in the first place?
I mean, they will try to defend themselves, but beyond that, I wouldn't expect any further retaliation in the sense that they would have to. The threat that you would have to hold out is that any further attack by Pakistan would also meet with further escalation, because as a stronger power, once again, India controls that escalation ladder, and it is time that India use that escalation ladder. It's time India sort of stop worrying about Pakistani escalation, because let Pakistan worry about Indian escalation. Because if you are talking about a purely deterrence level, one reason why the deterrence works is because we have essentially given credibility to the notion that Pakistan will escalate. We haven't really examined the question of how and why they would escalate, right? I mean, so that's
in fact, you've gone on you've argued in the past that India should show the willingness to initiate escalation every time an opportunity presented itself. In other words, India should unilaterally escalate vis-a-vis Pakistan as and when it deems fit. On the question of surgical strikes that you have written, that the promise of punishment, there should be a promise of punishment that will be unacceptable to the adversary, in this case Pakistan. So you are making the argument that no matter what their strategies are, no matter what you think they would respond militarily, you should go ahead and capture the moment and strike militarily unilaterally.
I would. The point is that in the what part, considering that India is a stronger side, what the country that has to worry is Pakistan. But paradoxically, we have the stronger country worrying about escalation. To me, that is just absurd. I mean, so it's a stronger country as to worry about escalation, then there is something wrong with the way the stronger country
Do you
is
think the Indian political leadership and the military leadership has the gumption and the stomach to unilaterally escalate militarily against Pakistan?
Well, so far they haven't shown any. So, I mean, it's not, I mean, I wouldn't say military leaders, because obviously these are political decisions, and in India definitely it's a political leadership that makes those decisions, and they haven't shown that sort of spine for a long time in order to be able to sort of deal with this problem. I mean, I would think that over a period of time we would have thought through about the consequences and how to sort of deal with the problem that Pakistan poses these, but we haven't really done that thinking.
Let's look at a different scenario.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.